I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear his voice. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but the look in her eyes told me everything. My husband, my soulmate, was in bed with my best friend. And the worst part? This wasn't the first time. We were the couple everyone envied. The kind that made people believe in soulmates. Ethan and I met in college, and from the very first moment, it felt like fate had pulled us together. He was charming, ambitious, and made me laugh even on my worst days. After graduation, we built a life that felt like a dream. A beautiful home, 2 kids, and Sunday barbecues with friends. Life wasn't just good, it was perfect. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But looking back, maybe the cracks had been there all along. Ethan worked long hours, and I stayed home, juggling the chaos of parenting and housework. I told myself his late nights were for us, for our future. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I'd feel the empty side of the bed and wonder if work was the only thing keeping him out so late. Then there was Emily, my best friend since high school. She was everything I wasn't, bold, carefree, and adventurous. She was always there to help with the kids, to listen to my frustrations, and to remind me to take care of myself. I trusted her with everything. Maybe too much. It started with little things. Ethan laughing a little too hard at Emily's jokes, her touching his arm when she talked. I brushed it off, convinced I was being paranoid. After all, she was like family. But then the phone calls started. Late-night messages, hushed tones, and the way Ethan would change the subject whenever I walked into the room. I ignored the signs for as long as I could. I didn't want to believe that the people I loved most could betray me. But the doubt gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night, forcing me to question every interaction, every glance, every word. The day I caught them was supposed to be like any other. A quick stop at home before heading to pick up the kids. Instead, I walked in on a moment that shattered my entire world. And now, standing in the wreckage of my trust and my marriage, I can't help but wonder, was it always a lie? In the weeks leading up to that devastating moment, the signs had been there, subtle, but impossible to ignore once I started noticing them. Ethan had grown distant. The way he kissed me goodbye in the mornings felt mechanical, like an obligation instead of affection. He stopped asking about my day, and even when we were in the same room, it felt like he wasn't really there. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't exciting anymore. Maybe I'd let motherhood consume too much of who I was, and he was just bored. I tried harder, new outfits, romantic dinners, and late-night talks. But no matter what I did, he remained distracted. Then there was Emily. She started showing up unannounced more often, always with some excuse to see the kids or drop something off. I didn't question it at first. She was my best friend, after all. But then I started noticing the way her eyes lingered on Ethan, the way they shared inside jokes that I wasn't a part of. The first red flag came one evening when Ethan left his phone on the counter while he showered. It buzzed, and her name flashed across the screen. I told myself not to look. Trust is the foundation of every relationship, right? But my hands moved before my brain could stop them. I can't stop thinking about earlier. We need to talk. The text sent a chill through me, but I shoved the panic down. Surely it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. A trip, a party, something innocent. I didn't confront him. Instead, I began watching closely. Ethan started coming home late more often, blaming meetings and deadlines. Emily's visits became more frequent, her hugs lasting a little too long. I'd walk into a room and they'd go quiet, exchanging glances that left me feeling like an outsider in my own home. I began losing sleep, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. I replayed every conversation, every moment, searching for clues. And the more I searched, the more pieces fell into place. The final straw came one night when Ethan claimed he was working late. I decided to surprise him with dinner at the office, only he wasn't there. Desperation clawed at my chest as I drove around aimlessly, hoping to convince myself it was all in my head. But then I saw his car, parked outside Emily's apartment. I sat there for what felt like hours, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. I wanted to storm in, to catch them in the act, but I couldn't move. Instead, I waited until he came out, his hair messy, his shirt untucked. When he saw me, his face drained of color. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I drove home in silence, tears blurring my vision. I needed more proof. I needed the truth. But deep down, I already knew. The morning after I saw Ethan leaving Emily's apartment, I couldn't look at him without feeling sick. My stomach churned every time he touched me, and yet I still longed for his embrace, some proof that I was wrong, that he still loved me. But the distance between us had grown too wide to ignore. I tried to act normal, but the tension between us was unbearable. I couldn't stop imagining the worst, his hands on her, his lips whispering the same sweet nothings he once told me. It haunted me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't push the images out of my head. That's when things with Emily took a darker turn. She started texting me more often, checking in, asking how I was, pretending like nothing had changed. I hated her for it. Every message felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of the betrayal she was too cowardly to admit. Then one evening she showed up at my door. "I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel like you've been avoiding me." Avoiding her? The audacity made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. "I've been busy," I replied flatly, stepping aside to let her in. As she walked past me, I caught the faint scent of Ethan's cologne clinging to her clothes. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay calm. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us like a loaded gun. Finally, she broke it. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but instead, I said, "I'm fine." But I wasn't, and she knew it. Her eyes softened as she reached out to touch my hand. "You know I'm always here for you, right?" The moment her fingers brushed against mine, something inside me snapped. I jerked my hand away, my heart pounding. "Don't," I whispered. "What's wrong?" she asked, leaning closer. I couldn't take it anymore. "What's wrong?" I hissed. "What's wrong is that I know. I know about you and Ethan." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw fear flicker across her face. But then, to my shock, she didn't deny it. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry." Her apology hit me like a punch to the gut. All the air left my lungs, and for a moment, I thought I might actually collapse. But what happened next surprised me even more. She moved closer, her eyes glistening with tears. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "It just happened." I wanted to push her away, to scream at her, but instead, I found myself frozen, trapped by the raw emotion in her eyes. And then, before I knew what was happening, her lips were on mine. It was wrong, so wrong, but in that moment I didn't care. I kissed her back, my anger and pain melting into something darker, something I couldn't control. When we finally pulled away, we were both breathless. "I shouldn't have done that," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Neither of us moved. The air between us was thick with tension, and I knew, just as she did, that this wasn't over. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by pain and betrayal. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about her. And as much as I hated myself for it, part of me didn't want to stop. I wasn't just angry at Ethan anymore. I was angry at myself. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But the worst part, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The guilt weighed on me like a stone, but it wasn't enough to stop what had started. Emily and I began meeting in secret, at her apartment, in hotel rooms, even in my own home when Ethan was away. Each encounter blurred the lines between anger, passion, and regret, but I couldn't bring myself to end it. Every time I tried to pull away, she pulled me back with whispers of apologies and desperate touches that made me forget the betrayal we'd both committed. I told myself it was revenge, punishment for Ethan's lies, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I wasn't just angry. I was addicted. But secrets never stay hidden for long. One evening, Ethan came home earlier than expected. Emily and I were in the living room, sitting far too close, our voices low and intimate. I didn't even hear the door open until his voice cut through the air like a knife. "What the hell is this?" I jumped to my feet, my pulse racing. Emily froze, her eyes darting between me and Ethan. "It's not what it looks like," I blurted out, the same pathetic excuse he had given me weeks earlier. But the look on his face told me he already knew. His eyes burned with betrayal, but what scared me most was the hurt I saw beneath the anger. For all his flaws, Ethan had loved me, or at least I thought he had. And now, I had destroyed whatever was left of that love. "Are you serious?" His voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw the man I had fallen in love with, the one who had promised to protect my heart. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't speak. What could I say? That I had done this because of him? That it was his betrayal that had pushed me into Emily's arms? No excuse would undo what had happened. Emily tried to explain, but Ethan wasn't listening. He turned to me instead. "How long?" he demanded. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. "How long?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "Does it matter?" I finally whispered, his face twisted with pain. It matters to me. And then, before I could stop him, he grabbed his keys and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. I collapsed onto the couch, my entire body trembling. Emily reached for me, but I pushed her away. "Don't," I said. "Just don't." The reality of what we'd done hit me like a tidal wave, drowning me in guilt and shame. I had destroyed my marriage, my family, and my own sense of self. All for what? Desperation? Loneliness? Or had it been something darker? Something I wasn't ready to admit even to myself? I spent the next few hours pacing the house, waiting for Ethan to come back. But he didn't. Instead, he sent a single text. "We're done." It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I wanted to scream, to beg for another chance, but I knew it was too late. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And the worst part, a part of me didn't regret it. That night, Emily stayed. She held me as I cried, whispering that everything would be okay. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. Because even as I clung to her, I couldn't ignore the truth. I had lost Ethan. And now I was losing myself. The days after Ethan left felt like a blur, an endless cycle of regret, guilt, and unbearable silence. He didn't come back. I checked my phone obsessively, hoping for a text, a call, anything. But the only message I ever received was from his lawyer. Divorce papers. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the thick packet of legal jargon that confirmed what I already knew. My marriage was over. Emily tried to comfort me, but her presence only made it worse. Every time she touched me, I felt sick, reminded of what we'd done and how it had destroyed everything I once held dear. I started avoiding her calls, her visits. At first, she didn't seem to notice, but eventually, her messages grew desperate. "Please talk to me. Don't shut me out." I wanted to shut her out. I wanted to shut everything out. But life doesn't stop, even when your world falls apart. The kids needed me, and pretending to be okay for their sake became my only focus. I plastered on a smile, packed lunches, and attended school events, all while dying inside. They asked about their dad, why he wasn't coming home, why we weren't a family anymore. I had no answers, only excuses. "He's busy, sweetheart," I said more times than I can count. "We're figuring some things out." But even as I tried to hold it together, the cracks kept growing. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I broke down completely. The house felt too big, too empty, and the memories of Ethan were everywhere. His favorite mug in the cabinet, the jacket he'd left hanging by the door. And then there was Emily. She showed up that night, pounding on the door until I let her in. "You can't keep shutting me out," she said, her voice breaking. "I love you." Her words stung. "You don't love me," I snapped. "You love the fantasy, the escape. Just like I did." She flinched but didn't back down. "That doesn't mean it wasn't real." "But what was real? The betrayal? The lies? The way we used each other to fill the voids in our lives?" I didn't know anymore. What I did know was that I couldn't keep pretending. "I can't do this," I said, stepping back. "Not with you. Not with anyone." For the first time, Emily didn't argue. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face as she walked away. And then I was alone. The months that followed were brutal. The divorce was finalized and Ethan moved out of state. He couldn't even look at me during the court hearings, and I couldn't blame him. The kids struggled too. They missed their father, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fill that void. But the hardest part was facing myself. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I didn't recognize, someone selfish, reckless, and broken. I wanted to blame Ethan, to say his betrayal pushed me into Emily's arms. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had made the choice, and now I had to live with it. It's been 6 months since Ethan walked out of my life, and the silence he left behind still echoes through every corner of this house. At first, I kept telling myself it would get better. That time would somehow erase the damage I'd done. But the truth is, some scars never fade. The divorce went through without much of a fight. Ethan didn't want explanations or apologies, he just wanted out. And who could blame him? The kids are still adjusting, but they're stronger than I ever gave them credit for. I, on the other hand, feel like I'm still sifting through the wreckage. Emily tried to reach out a few times after that night. I ignored every call, every text. I don't know what hurts more, the betrayal or the fact that, for a moment, I thought she could actually love me. But love built on lies is nothing more than an illusion. For a long time, I hated myself for what I'd done. I hated how weak I'd been, how easily I'd let loneliness push me into something so destructive. But somewhere in the chaos, I realized that self-loathing wouldn't fix anything. What I needed was forgiveness, not from Ethan, not from Emily, but from myself. So I started therapy. At first, it felt impossible to talk about what happened, to admit the things I'd done. But my therapist didn't judge me. Instead, she helped me unravel the layers of pain and insecurity that had led me down that path. I learned that infidelity doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not just about sex or passion. It's about longing, neglect, and the need to feel seen. But none of that excuses what I did. I betrayed my husband. I betrayed my best friend. But more than anything, I betrayed myself. Now, I'm focused on rebuilding, not the marriage I lost, but the person I want to be. I'm learning to be okay on my own, to find fulfillment in the life I have instead of chasing after something that was never real. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. Love isn't about grand gestures or stolen moments. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. If I could go back, I'd do so many things differently. But since I can't, all I can do is move forward, one step at a time. So, if you're reading this and you're standing at the edge of the same cliff I jumped off, let me be the voice that pulls you back. Don't let loneliness convince you to throw everything away. Don't let temptation blind you to the consequences. Because once you cross that line, there's no going back. What would you have done in my situation? Could you forgive a betrayal like this? Or walk away forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories about love, loss, and redemption. Stay tuned, because the next story might just change everything.